The old farmhouse had stood at the edge of town for as long as anyone could remember. A relic of another time, its wooden frame sagged with age, windows shattered, and vines crawling up its weathered walls. The stories surrounding the place were endless. Whispers of a family that had vanished overnight, of strange figures seen in the upper windows, and of a darkness that never quite seemed to leave its halls. I never put much stock in those tales, dismissing them as small-town folklore. But that changed when my friends dared me to spend a night inside. The air was thick with moisture as I pushed the door open, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. A scent of damp wood and decay filled my nostrils, and dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight. The entryway opened into a cavernous living room, where the remnants of another life lay scattered. Tattered furniture draped in cobwebs, an old armchair sagging by a cold fireplace, and a grandfather clock looming against the far wall, its hands frozen at exactly 3:12 a.m. I dropped my backpack onto the floor, exhaling slowly. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wood beneath my feet. It felt expectant, as if it had been waiting. I shook off the thought and set up my small sleeping area in what seemed to be the living room. As I did, the wind outside picked up, howling through the broken windows, sending a shiver down my spine. The cold felt unnatural, seeping into my bones despite the warmth of the summer night. Hours passed, and my nerves slowly settled. The silence became familiar, the emptiness just another part of the abandoned home. I even allowed myself to relax, stretching out on the couch and scrolling through my phone. But then, the clock chimed. The deep, hollow sound echoed through the house. I sat up abruptly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clock had been motionless when I arrived, its hands stuck for who knew how long. Yet now it rang out in the dead of night, counting time that shouldn't exist. My flashlight trembled as I shone it toward the clock. Its hands had moved. 3:13 a.m. A whisper slithered through the air, soft at first like a breath against my ear. I froze, straining to listen. It was distant, unintelligible at first, then clearer. A single sentence. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, the light darting over the empty room. My breath came in short gasps, my throat tightening. The whispering continued, threading through the walls, moving closer. My pulse pounded as I forced myself to my feet, backing away toward the staircase that led to the second floor. I didn't want to go deeper into the house, but something told me standing still was worse. And then the basement door creaked open. I turned sharply, my light spilling into the yawning darkness below. A wave of putrid air rushed up, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of that house, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. A shadow moved at the bottom of the stairs, a shape, barely distinguishable, shifting unnaturally in the dim light. Then, a voice, low, guttural, and close. "I've been waiting." Every hair on my body stood on end. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The temperature dropped sharply, the warmth of my own body now foreign. The shadow at the bottom of the stairs swayed, unnatural in its movements, like something barely learning how to exist. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I retreated, and then I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. I turned and ran. My feet barely touched the ground as I bolted for the front door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. But it wouldn't budge. The door, which had swung open so easily before, was now impossibly heavy, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. The whispering grew louder, no longer one voice, but many, overlapping, whispering my name, laughing in hushed, broken tones. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening. The footsteps behind me stopped. I didn't dare turn around. A breath, cold and damp, touched the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut and yanked on the door with all my strength. It didn't move. My chest tightened as panic set in. My mind raced through every possibility, every way out. Then I remembered. The garage. There was a side door leading to it. If I could just reach it, I might have a chance. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned and sprinted toward the hallway, where I knew the garage entrance was. The shadows in the house seemed to shift, moving with me, closing in. The whispers turned to something worse, a deep, rattling laughter, a chorus of voices from unseen mouths. The garage door was ahead. I lunged for it, grasping the handle and twisting it desperately. It gave way, and I stumbled inside. My fingers fumbled for the button to open the garage door. As I pressed it, the old mechanism groaned, the door rising painfully slow. Something moved behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. The laughter was deafening now, like it was inside my skull. I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled under the garage door before it had fully lifted, the jagged bottom edge scraping against my back as I pushed through. The night air hit me like a wave, but I didn't stop running. My lungs burned as I sprinted down the dirt path leading back to town. The farmhouse loomed behind me, silent once more, its shadows retreating into themselves. I didn't look back, not until I was safely on my neighbor's porch, pounding on the door, gasping for breath. Julian answered, his face shifting from confusion to concern as he saw me. "What the hell happened to you?" I turned back to the direction of the house, expecting, dreading, to see something standing at the edge of the trees. But there was nothing, just the old house, sitting there like it always had. The police came after Julian called them, but they found nothing. No evidence of forced entry, no signs of anyone else inside. The basement, which I had seen open, was locked with rusted chains. The clock, which had moved, was frozen at 3:12 a.m. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I know one thing. Something was in that house, and it had been waiting for me. I never thought anything terrifying could ever happen to me. I live a completely normal life. Nothing exciting, nothing unusual. Because of that, I always enjoyed listening to horror stories, watching creepy videos, and reading unsettling tales online. They gave me a thrill, a rush, without any real danger attached. I never thought I would become a story myself. It was late, probably around 3:30 or 4 a.m. The house was silent except for the occasional rumble of thunder outside. Another storm had rolled in, the kind that rattled windows and made the power flicker. We had been having a lot of them lately, some of the worst storms in years. I always liked thunderstorms, the way they lit up the sky in flashes, the rhythmic pounding of rain against the roof. But the wind always made me uneasy. There was something about how it could shift from a soft whisper to a howling scream in an instant that unsettled me. That night's storm was especially violent. I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when suddenly, the entire house was plunged into darkness. The power had gone out. I sighed, tossing my phone onto my nightstand. I still had a decent charge, so it wasn't too bad. I figured I'd try to get some sleep since I had nothing better to do. But as I rolled over and closed my eyes, I realized just how thirsty I was. My throat was dry, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't. Grabbing my phone again, I switched on the flashlight and got out of bed. I opened my bedroom door and was immediately hit with a wave of freezing air. It felt like I had stepped into a walk-in freezer. The temperature in the house had plummeted. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. As I got closer, the wind outside picked up, its eerie howling growing louder, almost as if it was coming from inside the house. I entered the kitchen, still groggy but aware enough to feel something was off. My eyes instinctively scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. The back patio door was wide open. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I stared at the gaping doorway, trying to process what I was looking at. The storm outside was raging, yet the door stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. I hadn't opened it. My grandparents, who lived with me, wouldn't have either, especially not in the middle of a storm. I swallowed hard, my heart starting to pound in my chest. I wanted to believe I had simply forgotten to lock it, that maybe a gust of wind had forced it open. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Someone had to have opened it. My hands were shaking as I stepped forward, peering out into the darkness. The rain fell in thick sheets, making it nearly impossible to see past the porch. I reached for the handle and quickly slid the door shut, locking it securely. My paranoia kicked in, making me glance over my shoulder as if expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one there. Trying to shake the unease, I filled a glass of water and gulped it down before hurrying back to my room. I closed my door behind me and locked it. Just in case, I turned off my phone's flashlight and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. but sleep wouldn't come. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Had someone been in the house? I sat up again, listening intently. Nothing, just the wind and the occasional rumble of thunder. But my gut told me something was wrong. I slid out of bed, grabbed the chair from my desk, and wedged it under the doorknob. It made me feel a little safer, but not much. I turned my phone's flashlight back on, letting the dim glow illuminate my room. Then I forced myself to check the closet. Empty. Under the bed. I froze. Something was staring back at me. A pair of bloodshot eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine. The figure beneath my bed was a woman, or at least she used to be. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over sharp bones, her mouth twisted into an unnatural grin, revealing yellowed, rotting teeth. Her hands, skeletal and covered in grime, were curled against the floor, fingers twitching slightly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she cackled. A sound so shrill, so inhuman, it sent every nerve in my body into panic. I threw myself backward, scrambling off the bed and knocking over my nightstand in the process. The lamp crashed to the floor. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body was frozen in fear. The woman started to crawl. Slowly at first, then faster, her limbs contorting unnaturally as she dragged herself from under the bed. I snapped out of my trance and lunged for the door, yanking the chair away with trembling hands. Just as I managed to twist the lock, I heard her whisper, her voice hoarse and giddy. "Where are you going?" I flung the door open and sprinted down the hall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I reached my grandparents' room and banged on the door, gasping for air. "Grandpa, please open the door, please!" The door swung open within seconds. My grandfather stood there, groggy but alert, his expression shifting to concern as he saw my face. But before I could say anything, we both heard it. Fast, shuffling footsteps coming down the hallway. My grandfather reacted instantly. He reached into the nightstand beside his bed and pulled out a gun, something I had no idea he even owned. He stepped forward, weapon raised, just as a white blur darted past the doorway and toward my bedroom. He didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the air, the deafening blast shaking me to my core. Silence. I stood there, breathless, my ears ringing. We waited, listened. Then, after what felt like an eternity, my grandfather cautiously stepped down the hallway. I followed, gripping the fabric of his shirt like a terrified child. My bedroom window was wide open. The curtains fluttered violently from the storm outside. Rain had soaked the floor, but there was no sign of the woman. She was gone. We didn't call the police. What could we even say? That some skeletal woman had crawled out from under my bed and vanished into the night? We had no proof, no cameras, nothing. But that didn't stop us from taking precautions. The very next day, we installed new locks on every window and door in the house. My grandfather started keeping his gun closer than ever. And me? I never slept in that room again. I don't know what she was. I don't know how long she had been there. But the thought that keeps me up at night is this. What if I hadn't woken up? What if I hadn't checked under my bed? Would I have ever woken up at all? It was late September when my best friend Mark and I decided to take a weekend trip to his family's remote cabin deep in the woods. It was meant to be a relaxing getaway. No cell service, no distractions, just nature and peace. The cabin was small, but cozy, with one bedroom, a modest kitchen, and a living room with a pull-out couch. The nearest town was miles away, and at night, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Friday night passed uneventfully. We made a fire, grilled some food, and sat on the porch watching the stars. But Saturday night was when everything changed. The sky had been cloudy all day, and by the time the sun set, an eerie fog had settled over the trees. We were sitting inside, playing cards, when we first heard it. A faint noise outside. A single, deliberate knock on the cabin door. Mark and I exchanged looks. We weren't expecting anyone, and there wasn't a soul around for miles. He stood up slowly, his face serious, and walked to the door. "Who's there?" he called out. Silence. He opened the door slightly, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the faint outline of trees disappearing into the mist. Mark shut the door and locked it, shaking his head. Must have been the wind. I didn't say anything, but something felt off. The knock had been too precise, too intentional. The wind didn't knock. A few minutes passed and we tried to shrug it off. Then, another knock. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door. My skin prickled with unease. This time, we didn't move, we just listened. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, charged with an invisible weight. Then we heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving around the porch. Someone was circling the cabin. Mark grabbed the flashlight from the table and turned it on. He pointed it at the nearest window, scanning the darkness outside. I stood behind him, heart pounding in my chest. And then in the brief beam of light, we saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line. It was motionless, wearing what looked like old, tattered clothing. It was hard to make out any details, but something about the posture, the stillness, sent chills down my spine. Mark turned off the flashlight immediately. "Get away from the windows," he whispered. We backed away, our breaths shallow. The footsteps on the porch had stopped. Then, the sound of something dragging across the wood. A slow, scraping noise, like nails or claws gliding across the door. My pulse pounded in my ears. Mark moved toward the bedroom, signaling for me to follow. He had a hunting rifle stored under the bed, and right now, it was our only defense. As he rummaged through his bag for ammunition, I peeked out the window again, barely lifting the curtain. The figure was gone. I exhaled slowly, relief flooding through me until I heard the breathing. Right outside the window, shallow, ragged breaths just inches away. I didn't think, I just reacted. I bolted to the bedroom and shut the door, locking it behind me. "There's someone right outside the window," I whispered. Mark loaded the rifle. "If they come inside, we shoot." We stood there, waiting. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin walls. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Then, a single, deliberate creak from the living room floorboards. Someone, or something, was inside. Mark raised the rifle, his hands steady. We held our breath, listening as the slow, shuffling footsteps moved through the living room, then into the kitchen. The only thing separating us now was a thin wooden door. Then silence. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would give us away. Mark's grip tightened on the rifle. The door handle twitched. We braced ourselves. Then suddenly, the front door slammed open. A gust of wind howled through the cabin. We waited, but there were no more footsteps. No movement. Mark motioned for me to stay back as he crept toward the bedroom door, rifle raised. He yanked it open and stepped into the now eerily silent cabin. No one was there. The front door swung gently in the wind, but the figure was gone. No footprints in the wet dirt outside, no signs that anyone had been there at all. We didn't sleep that night. At first light, we packed up and left. To this day, I don't know what we encountered, but I do know one thing: we were not alone in that cabin.